restrained him. She ruled out fentanyl overdose, saying people who die from that go to sleep or fall unconscious and their breathing shallows. The video shows that Floyd struggled until he couldn't struggle anymore.
Fox's Mike Tobin reporting. As for the protests in Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis tonight, Mayor Mike Elliott has just tweeted that he will be issuing a curfew. America is listening to Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
The vaccine is officially here, and we aren't just talking about the COVID vaccine, but a financial vaccine at Bank Pacific. We may not be doctors, but we can help you with your financial health. Whether to take advantage of today's crazy low rates, or just a local bank that has your back. At Bank Pacific, we want to help make 2021 your best year yet. Because for 66 years, where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
An incident at a facility in Iran is being called a cyber attack and a terrorist act.
Iran says an issue with the electrical grid at the Natanz nuclear facility is to blame for what they're calling a terrorist attack. The country this evening is reserving the right to respond. Just hours prior to the incident, Natanz started to enrich uranium using new advanced centrifuges that allow the process to be done faster. This led media here in Jerusalem to speculate that Israel was behind the blackout, though no country has taken responsibility. Speaking on state television, Iranian officials made clear that no casualties or contamination problems happened during the loss of power. Over the weekend, Iran celebrated what they call Nuclear Day, as President Hassan Rouhani addressed the nation. The Iranian political leader said the Islamic Republic has no intention of obtaining a nuclear weapon. Western intelligence assessments disagree with that declaration.
That's Fox's Trey Yingst reporting. Also new tonight, President Biden has an executive order for a commission to study whether to add seats to the Supreme Court. There are currently 9 Supreme Court justices.
Other justices, liberal and conservative, have said in the past, leave the court alone. 9 seems to work. Now, Justice Stephen Breyer, you don't really hear from these justices speaking publicly, but he spoke at Harvard last week and said this about adding justices to the court.
Structural alteration motivated by the perception of political influence can only feed that latter perception, further eroding that trust.
Now, the Washington Post out with an op-ed replacing life tenure instituted in 1788 at a time of much shorter life expectancy with an 18-year term. That is the Post proposal that would drain some of the intensity from the Supreme Court politics by providing both parties with foreseeable regular opportunities to nominate justices, thus lowering the stakes of each vacancy.
That's Fox's David Spont reporting. I'm Mary Corsetti, and this is Fox News.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Nicholas. If you are a small business, you may be interested in a federal program called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This program can provide federal funds to match equity investments into your company or help you get lower interest rates at local banks. To find out more on how this program can help your small business, please contact your Guam Congressional Office at 475-6453 or at michael.snicholas@mail.house.gov.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the Office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Hafaday, this is Rocky Martinez, professional heavyweight MMA fighter. Nothing gets in my way when I go pro at Subway. Pack a punch with double the protein on any foot-long sub for just $2 more. For a limited time only. Subway, eat fresh.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services. Sunday brunch at Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro is back. Come and enjoy Mezcla's true taste of Guam. Open for 2 seatings at 10:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. $28.95 for adults and $14.95 for kids 5 to 11 years old. Call 479-2652 or 2653 for reservations.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Boy, that felt good, Jose.
It's been a long time, huh?
Yeah, it was 70 hours and no tall tales. Boy, it's a long walk across the desert there, but we finally make it. We're back on the air with all of our tailgaters out there in the international radio listening audience. I couldn't be happier. So let's start out with Zemi Ikatni, as is our usual custom. I was kvetching for about a year because the Daily News never ran any local editorials. They continually ran boilerplate from Gannett News Service or USA Today. After seeing a week's worth of editorials under the new management, I'm beginning to look at the boilerplate era as the good old days. Here's today's offering. Let's not be Hawaii. Okay, good. Let's not be Hawaii. Let's not be American Samoa. Let's not be Alabama. Let's not be any place other than Guam. And here they go. Take a multi-pronged approach to Guam's high cost of living. That sounds really good. Multi-prong is a wonderful phrase. Yeah, let's engage a multi-prong approach to problem solving. Oh yeah, good idea.
Stab it with a fork.
Yeah. Unless action is taken, Guam's cost of living will soon reach a boiling point for residents. The rate of inflation increased slightly last year, although percentage change was not as much as past years, 2016, 17, and 2018, according to the island's latest consumer price index. It doesn't mean it's not high, it just means it's not changed much, said Tyrone Titano, BOSAP director. Utilities bills have been increasing utilities bills have been increasing? Oh, I didn't know that. As have the cost of buying grocery. Not groceries, but grocery. Gasoline is at pre-pandemic highs. Most workers don't make enough money at their jobs to afford a new home. Whoa. And finding a decent, safe, and affordable apartment is difficult. Housing costs have risen in recent years and likely will get even higher due to the military buildup. The average price for a single-family dwelling has increased about 65% over the past 7 years, says Siska Hutapea, president of Cornerstone. A single-family home's median price is $333,500. For Guam condominiums, the average price is about $215,000. The limited skilled labor force, the high construction cost, and the tedious building permit process has put a strain on new supply. She said, for renters, the military buildup has also put pressure on the market. There is no magical silver bullet solution, such as increase to the minimum wage. Guam needs to take a multi-pronged approach to addressing the high cost of living. This isn't a hopeless situation. We can get it done. All right, now we can get it done. I'm going to take notes here. The island put together a business recovery force working with the government to Guam to help opening Guam again as the island reeled and continues to reel due to Wuhan virus pandemic. We must take a similar approach, bringing together, here we go, bringing together the private and public sectors to outline a strategy to address the island's cost of living before it becomes out of hand. We don't want to become another Hawaii, where many residents have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to afford rent and survive, and some folks who have simply given up erecting tents on public beaches because they can't find affordable places to live. We must not allow this to become the future of Guam. Well, fine. Now here's the plan. We must take a similar approach, bringing together the private and public sectors to outline a strategy to address the island's cost of living. Okay, here's what the government can do. The government can be an effective, efficient government operating under the rule of law, as it were, in accordance with the rule of law, providing basic government services on at least a break-even basis. That's what the government can do. That's all we need the government to do. We don't need the government to do anything else. We don't need any nice-to-haves and special bureaus and Bureau of Women's Affairs and all the rest of this stuff. We need to cut the government down to as small as we can make it. We need to lower taxes, and as far as the public sector is concerned, get the hell out of the way. The only way you're going to lose, as you were, the only way you're going to lower the cost of living is by increasing production. And the government doesn't produce anything. It's the private industry that produces things. But this is the second time now that the solution, Jose, has been, let's get the government involved.
That's exactly what Hawaii is.
Yeah. If you want to see how well it works, go to the highest cost of living in the nation. All right, let's check out the Post. I'm not even going to read the Post editorial today because the Post editorial is talking about Neighborhood Watch. Neighborhood Watch is a good thing. Call this phone number. Get to know your neighbor. It's not really an editorial. Actually, what it is, it's what the chief of police should be putting in the newspaper as a letter to the editor. But, of course, the chief of police has been in favor of Neighborhood Watch. You know how long, Jose? From the get-go. Yeah. So I'm going to run a column that ran in the Post today instead of the editorial, because the column reads like an editorial ought to read. The phrase, quote, "We are all in this together," that has been continually touted by the current administration, referencing the pandemic situation, only rings partially true. Yes, we're all facing the same pandemic, but some people are treated a lot better than others when it comes to having continued employment and income during this period. Government employees have been permitted to stay home and get paid without setting foot in their work offices. If you recall, some 30,000 private sector employees lost their jobs, all while government of Guam employees remained on the payroll and government offices were closed for all services. If you recall, the entire legislature actually disappeared for more than 2 weeks until Jim Moylan stood out in front with a sign and shamed them to come back into session. According to recent news reports, during the pandemic, government jobs have increased by 1.3%, and government employee wages increased by 10.5%. Where does all that money come from? It comes out of the backs of taxpayers, both individuals and business. The same people who were forced to close their businesses and lay off all the aforementioned employees, while government employment grew in both number and payroll funded government operations. The current employment rate is now the highest in Guam's history at 19.4%, and nearly 14,000 people remain unemployed and thousands of others remain underemployed. So clinging to the trite statement that, quote, we're all in this together, is an affront to the intelligence of the tax-paying public. The very people who kept food on the tables of all those government employees who continued to be paid while the balance of the island suffered were not, quote, in it together. The administration and legislature have never had, nor do they have today, a plan for dealing with this ongoing dilemma. I continue to make and agree to monthly emergency declarations that are always shared with the general public at the very last minute. Not having a plan and sharing change at the last minute only goes to show an overall lack of capable leadership on the part of both branches of government. The administration has been doing this for more than a year now, and the legislature continually allows it to continue. They should get out the Bob and Ray resolution. Again, both are direct affront to the voting population of Guam and speaks volumes to their lack of leadership. They both continue to run by the seat of their pants because they have been bailed out with hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds. To add insult to injury, the federal government isn't doing much better when it comes to planning and is heading for many severe economic issues overall. The government of Guam is facing a similar economic decline driven by erratic decisions that have been made during the last 12 months. Hold on to your hats, folks, and get ready for the shock when the federal money runs out. Yeah. And that was by Lee Weber, a weekly columnist for the Post. And I have a recommendation. Editorial board at the Post, read it. This is how it's done. Folks over at the Daily News, read it. This is what a real editorial looks like. It lays it out. It's factual. It has holds people accountable, and it's got a call to action. Can't you other guys do that? So although Lee Weber is not a daily newspaper, he's a weekly columnist, he joins that rare crowd of non-newspapers to be awarded the coveted Blue Star. Congratulations, Lee Weber. Congratulations, Guam Daily Post. I'm giving him a news hole to fill with his column on Mondays. Okay, let's go from there to the card. And my program notes. I start out with Steve. I wish I could set this to music, like The Sound of Music. How do you describe a chief named Ignacio?
That's, yeah.
Yeah. He showed the way on suppressors, and he made a name for himself with Jerry Kitchen. And he still hasn't come clean on Jeepgate. And as far as the gambling in the government of Guam, well, he doesn't have jurisdiction at the judiciary. And there's not much he could do about Jerrygate, because when the car went airborne, he lost jurisdiction, which was assigned to the Federal Aviation Administration. So here's what we got. Of course, we got Steve starting out the card. And as the legendary Real Joe Cruz would say, it's not what Steve has done, it's what he hasn't done. And then last week we had Carlotta even hiding the ball from Therese. But when the Vigilance Committee got involved, Carlotta stopped stonewalling. We go to national here and see that Tom Shea and Mariana Leon Guerrero haven't come forward in the face of the latest BLM scandal. Tall Tales sent a note to the lieutenant governor, who has also educated us on the bum rap. You don't know what a bum rap is? Stay tuned for Tall Tales versus the lieutenant governor, when you'll find out the meaning of the phrase, he took a bum rap on that one. And then I started last week on Julian Uggan and his pen pals and the big story. Oh, the United Nations Human Rights Committee has gotten involved. Wrong. Julian Uggan has found 3 pen pals. And the 3 pen pals wrote a letter to Excellency. And Julian has taken a page from the governor's book. He's milking it for all it's worth. And there isn't anything there. So that's probably about as far as we'll get today with the card. I've got some that have been on that card for quite a while. So I don't have anything new to add to Steve's portion of the program right now. And, of course, Steve doesn't either, because with all of the issues flying around over Steve's head, he has apparently found shelter somewhere and has not really come out and said much of anything about any of the issues. Okay, then from there we go to the national scene, and we start out with Black Lives Matter versus Tom Shea and Mariana Leon Guerrero. Now, to refresh your recollection, Tom Shea and Mariana Leon Guerrero were the apparent organizers of a little chautauqua that they put on at Skinner Plaza, where several medical types, doctors, nurses, etc., put on their white coats and went down to Skinner Plaza and kneeled for 8 minutes and 48 seconds or however long it was, and made it absolutely clear that they were white coats for Black Lives Matter. They were supporting Black Lives Matter. I called them on it the first day. You know, I said, what you are is white coats engaging in virtue signaling. And what you're doing is you're encouraging rioting, arson, and looting. But, of course, if it makes you feel good about yourselves, go for it. And since that time, more and more stuff has come out about Black Lives Matter, and I haven't heard either one of those two, neither one of which is weakly endowed around the mouth, come forward and say, you know, maybe we were too anxious on that whole Black Lives Matter thing. Now, here's the latest that I pulled out of Breitbart. The National Black Lives Matter movement has been raking in the dough for years, taking donations from people who believe they are helping make a difference for African Americans. Unfortunately, it has been proven time and again that the national organization is nothing more than a grift, G-R-I-F-T. A grifter is a con man. Yeah, I just saw, what was the name of that movie with Paul Newman and The Sting, yeah.
Oh, about pool, right?
The Sting. The Sting was about grifters.
Oh, grifters.
The Big Con. Remember?
I'm thinking of a different movie then.
Yeah, you're thinking about Minnesota Fats and The Hustler.
The Hustler, there you go.
Yeah, not The Sting, yeah. So if you saw the movie The Sting, the Paul Newman character and what was the other guy's name? Famous actors were grifters. They were con men, and the whole movie was about how they conned their victims and how they ran a big con.
Robert Redford.
Yeah, Robert Redford. Yeah, that's why can't I think of that name? So when it comes to big cons, you know, they did an elaborate setup where they set up something that looked like a bookie joint with all of the trimmings, and they enticed someone that had done something that they didn't like, to laying out a huge amount of cash betting on what he thought was a sure thing. Well, it turned out he'd been conned. And that's what Black Lives Matter is. It's the big con. You know, they've got the trimmings. They say the right things. It looks pretty good, but it's a big con. So going on with this article here, it has been proven time and again that the national organization is nothing more than a grift designed to push a white progressive agenda that has nothing to do with safeguarding black lives. This story is the latest in a series of examples proving that the Black Lives Matter national organization, unlike many of the local chapters, is nothing more than a Marxist con job that uses black faces as a cover for their true operations was recently brought to light. It happened when the news broke that one of the group's co-founders purchased a rather expensive home. It turns out that being a hard leftist activist grifter is rather lucrative these days. As Red State's Nick Arama reported that Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of the National Black Lives Matter movement, recently purchased a rather expensive home. She wrote, "It turns out Cullors, who now goes by the name Khan, K-H-N, Cullors," which is so appropriate.
C-O-N, Cullors?
Yeah, K-H-A-N, the alternate spelling for Khan, after marrying Janaya Khan, who is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto, just bought some new digs. It's not a revolutionary cell type of place either. A corporate entity that she controls just shelled out more than $1.4 million for a mini compound in Topanga Canyon in L.A. The purchase was made amid criticism from local chapters about how the national organization is handling the money it's receiving from donors. Political, which is not a conservative organization, reported 10 local chapters are severing ties with Black Lives Matter Global Network, as the national leadership is known. They are furious that Patrisse Cullors, its remaining co-founder, assumed the role of executive director of the group and made these decisions without their input. Black Lives Matter is democracy, right? The leaders of the local chapters also contend that the national organization is not being quite as generous when it comes to supporting their work in their communities. With Cullors' new and improved living situation, it appears the concerns are valid. Anyone can see that this is a level of grittery that would make Al Sharpton and Sean King look like Mother Teresa. However, as activists trained in Marxism, nothing that Cullors is doing should be surprising, because as we know, all pigs are equal. Some pigs are just more equal than others. One of the unspoken but often lived tenets of Marxism is that the ruling class lives in luxury while the peasant class is forced to do the work. Marxist leadership always talks a good game about promoting equality, but it never takes too long to find out that some animals are more equal than others. Joseph Stalin had several houses all across the Soviet Union. Each of these homes was far more luxurious than anything the average citizen lived in. The same holds true for Communist China's Mao Zedong. North Korea's Kim Jong-un is living a veritable paradise while his citizens starve to death daily. In light of this, it seems evident that Cullors would make such a decision, purchasing a $1.4 million home while local chapters do the work on the ground is classic Marxism. Those who are not hard leftists can easily look to history to see that this tendency is all too common among the Marxist crowd. Unfortunately, many rank-and-file leftists don't see the grift, or if they do, they seem to believe it's an outlier. The reality is that this paradigm is par for the course, not a one-off. The problem is that many who embrace tenets of Marxism haven't done the research. They don't know how their beliefs always lead to tyranny. If they actually delved into history, they would see that Colors is also emulating Stalin, Zedong, Kim, and their other heroes. To put it simply, Patrisse Cullors is acting like what she is, a full-blown socialist. Nothing to see here, right? So I hope you're listening, Tom and Mariana, because this is mild compared to some of the stuff that's floating around about Patrisse Cullors and Black Lives Matter. And, of course, we all watched Black Lives Matter all summer, burning everything they could get their hands on. All right, so much for that. I noticed I got a caller. Paul from Boston wants to talk about NBA players. Why would he want to talk about NBA players, I wonder?
He has a little bit of a hook to it.
A little bit of a hook.
And not just the shot.
Hook shot. Is he playing zone defense, or I can't say man-to-man anymore?
Let's hope he's in the zone when he's talking.
Person to person. Okay, we'll take a short break, and I'll give Paul from Boston a few minutes to talk about NBA players.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Need to finish the job or start one the right way? Get the right stuff at East West Rental Center. You can switch to easy mode using industrial strength equipment. With years of experience helping builders, East West Rental gives you exactly what you need. Tools for landscaping, concrete, lifts, trucks, tables, tents, chairs, water blasters, excavators, forklifts, air compressors, and more. Call East West Rental Center at 646-1463 or visit them in Upper Tumont. Open Monday to Saturday from 7 to 5, Sundays 8 to 5.
Now, more Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie. Spitting truth like watermelon seeds at a summer picnic. Call now, 888-TALK, 888-8255.
Okay, so here we are, back on Tall Tales, and boy, does it feel good after 2 whole days of no Tall Tales, no international radio listening audience, no tailgaters posting on my Facebook, nobody to talk to on the phone. It's been tough, but we're back. Started out talking about a little bit of national news. Patrisse Cullors, the founder of Black Lives Matter, which is obviously a pretty pro-communist group. Cullors herself confessed in 2015 that she was a trained Marxist. Yeah, and her 2 cohorts were. So I was wondering when I saw something pop up on my stack, I thought maybe that's Tom Shea calling to say, you know, I got taken in there. I was conned myself. And Marianne and I, when we did that, we really kind of should have waited and watched. But anyhow, we know the error in our ways. Somehow they haven't called yet. But I do have a call from a gentleman named, well, a guy named Paul from Boston. I don't know if he's a gentleman or not. Good afternoon, Paul from Boston.
Oh, Bob, how are you?
Couldn't be better, Paul from Boston.
Have you missed me?
Somehow I have overcome the tendency to miss you, Paul from Boston.
I miss you, sir. I think I'm a gentleman sometimes.
Okay, you wanted to tell me about NBA basketball?
I was going to talk about it. It's a big subject for me. I could chime back in with the Black Lives stuff you were talking about. When you quote Breitbart, it's a little tough for me. They don't have the best sources.
Yeah, nothing like the New York Times or the Washington Post, that's for sure.
No, not at all. Or the New Republic. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, about NBA players, it really got me upset a little bit. I think your fan base watches the NBA.
Yeah, a lot of folks here, well, they did until we started all this kneeling stuff, and I think that really turned an awful lot of people off on professional sports in general, basketball. Paul.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that turned a lot of people off on professional sports in general, NBA basketball in particular.
Did it really?
Really. Yeah, I think people who like basketball want to watch basketball. They don't want to see righteousness preening and virtue signaling when they sit down and watch basketball.
And that was somewhat of my point. My point was I want to see some basketball players. So these guys are getting paid $40 million a year, and they're not playing basketball because they sprained or twisted an ankle. So we can't even watch them, and they're still collecting their paychecks.
Well, I'm about to rule on that one right now, Paul. Are you ready? Poor babies, sprained ankles.
That's what I'm saying, Bob.
So I have very little sympathy for the left-wing athletes, the ones that are doing the kneeling and things like that, and some of the folks out in Hollywood that follow the same thing, using their opportunity to make huge amount of money when their job is to be entertaining us, instead using that opportunity for virtue signaling and righteousness preening. And what they're doing is something that when I was younger I used to do for nothing, just because I like doing it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Bob, what's virtue signaling?
Say again?
What is virtue signaling? What is that?
You don't know what virtue signaling is, Paul from Boston?
I don't.
Wow. And you're kind of over there on the left. I guess maybe that's why you don't know. Virtue.
I don't know what.
Virtue signaling means saying or taking an action that you know is going to resonate with a particular group of people because they're going to identify with what you're doing or what you're saying, even though for you it's just a passing fancy. You heard me talk about virtue. You heard me talk about virtue signaling with our white coats for Black Lives Matter here. We had about 2 dozen. We had about 2 dozen medical professionals who went down to a public park called Skinner Plaza, and they'd let it be known that they were white coats for Black Lives Matter. I suspect that neither one of them had ever done so much as sent a dime to the NAACP or done anything at all and during the civil rights era or anything at all, but they wanted to make sure that they were down there in their white coats saying, look at me, I'm a good person because look what I'm doing right now. That's virtue signaling.
Yeah, it's like identity politics somewhat. Yeah, I got you. Now, with the Black Lives Matter movement, I don't know how many black people are on Guam at the moment.
I don't either, and I'm not going to count because I don't care. But go ahead.
When the people that are doing it, and I'm with you on, there are a lot of people saying Black Lives Matter that don't give a 2 cents about it. They're just using it for their own good. But there are still some people out there using it and or doing it well. I don't know how to put it so much, but
okay.
I'm sorry. I'm just saying there's a lot of people. I see a lot of people. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. But what are they really doing?
Other than looting, arson, and riots, nothing. That's it.
Yeah, I don't know about that. But
Okay, the next item on my card here, Paul from Boston, is called Josh versus the Court. So I think I'm going to have to move on to that. It's always fun to talk to you, and we had some long chats a little earlier, but you know, it's come to my attention that most folks listen to this show to hear me talk. And
how do you think they're gonna? How do you think they're gonna find Chauvin? What do you think's gonna happen in the court case?
You mean the George Floyd case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think that's gonna end up?
I would like to get into that, but I can't do it justice in a short period of time. The best thing I suppose I could tell you, and it's a much longer story than this, that in a murder trial, it's necessary for the prosecution to convince everyone on the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that all of the elements of the crime were proven beyond a reasonable doubt. If one juror doesn't go with that flow, then it's a mistrial, and you got to start over again.
Yep.
Keep that in mind.
I know. Oh, I know, and they also opened up third-degree murder for the first time. The judge said that could be a possibility.
Yeah,
which is precedent. So I think that's
well, it's not precedent. It's an option. But anyhow, Paul, I got to go back to my card.
Good to talk to you, Bob.
All right, Paul. Thanks for calling. Paul from Boston. Just goes to show you the breadth of our international listening audience. I hardly get through the Zema Ikodny, and there's a caller all the way from Boston.
And that's probably the fourth or fifth call, so I say loyalty right there.
Well, is it loyalty or enchantment?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so next item on the card is Josh versus the court. And I'm talking about the Superior Court here, and I'm talking about Josh Tenorio, our lieutenant governor. And there's a story that ran in KOAM on Friday. Adelope stands by Customs Director.
Eeks, yes.
Adelope is standing by their top gun at Guam Customs in quarantine after pleading guilty to harassing an employee on the job. Yeah. Customs Director Ike Pareto isn't going anywhere, Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio said. I have very strong confidence in Mr. Pareto, in his integrity, in his management, Lieutenant Governor said. Earlier this week in the Superior Court, the director pled guilty to harassment as a petty misdemeanor. The case stems from a July 2020 incident involving an alleged physical altercation with a female employee. They couldn't just say female. They had to say female employee. So it could have been an alleged altercation with a female goat, I suppose, if they hadn't said female employee. According to the plea agreement, the assault charge was dismissed, and Pareto was allowed to remain director so long as he keeps his distance from the victim. He also has to pay court fees and restitution. Now, how could that be if the case was dismissed? No, I read another article that he pled guilty. When a case is dismissed, you don't have to pay anything. He also has to pay court fees, restitution, complete an anger management course, listen to tall tales every day for the next 6 months.
It threw us off.
Do you think I was serious? That's better, yeah.
We got deleted.
And perform 50 hours of community service. And he can't possess a gun unless it's for work purposes. I think that these charges that's what happened to him. And another article says he pled guilty, which only makes sense.
Wait, he can't possess a gun?
Yeah, except in the line of duty.
That sounds kind of serious.
Well, it does. Yeah, but I'll go back and do my autopsy before I go through my autopsy on how the lieutenant governor talked about the bum rap, as I promised in my introduction. Here's what the lieutenant governor said. Now, the guy pled guilty, right? And they put all of these onerous conditions on him. Here's what the lieutenant governor said. I think these charges that resulted in him and the disposition of the cases unfortunately get complicated. But I can tell you, coming from the court, now he's saying, I can tell you coming from the court, he's trying to clothe himself in a particular form of expertise. I used to be at the court, he's saying. I can say that. I was a full-time judge for 6 months. But, you know, I wore a black robe and I was involved in the judicial side of the operation. I don't talk about that. Talk about myself once in a while, sometimes, because sometimes it's about me. But he's trying to cloak himself in some kind of expertise when he was the administrative director of the court. The administrative director of the court is far away from the judicial side of the court. That's the folks in the black robes. The administrative director takes care of what we in the Army we call ash and trash. He pays the power bill and the water bill, signs GG1s, does all the administrative stuff. And unless he has made some effort to take some courses, doesn't know any more about how the judiciary functions than anyone else does.
Sounds like he's manipulating his credentials there.
Exactly. But he says, and I think that these charges that resulted in him and the disposition of the cases get complicated. The charges and the disposition get complicated. But I can tell you, coming from the court, I know how this stuff works. That's basically, you can't fool me. I worked there myself. I know how this stuff comes down.
Bob, I can tell you from driving past the courthouse every day to go to work, I agree.
Inside knowledge, right?
I agree with the lieutenant governor.
All right. He says, sometimes the way the system works, he's going to tell us how the judicial system works. He ought to whisper in Steve Ignacio's ear, who apparently has no knowledge of the judiciary at all. The way the system works doesn't always allow for what I think is adequate justice.
You don't say.
This is the lieutenant governor now. I mean, this is scandalous.
So is he saying that that Mr. Prado got off scot-free?
He's saying, when we get to it, you'll see that he's saying that Pareda took a bum rap. That's what he's saying. I think these charges that resulted in him and the disposition of these cases get complicated. But I can tell you, coming from the court, the way the system works doesn't always allow for what I think is adequate justice. Now, I've heard this one before. I heard someone saying, having been at the port for a couple of weeks, I know that this whole Port 7 thing there's no justice there. And I'm going to appoint a task force to make sure that justice is done. Civil Service Commission, courts, no. Because I used to be in the Youth Congress, he said. I know how the system works. Same thing here, Josh. Is there a pattern here? Is this an MO for this administration? I know the way the system works. Doesn't always allow for what I think is adequate justice. Now, of course, when it comes to adequate justice, the touchstone is this. It's what the lieutenant governor thinks. So any reporter that covers the court beat, whenever there's any kind of a decision or verdict, the first thing they should do is say, Lieutenant Governor, do you think that this was adequate justice? Because that's what's really important. He goes on to explain, meaning that people get forced to plead to lesser offenses so they don't get stuck in a court system for years. This is your lieutenant governor, sports fans. So let's go back again. Now let's talk about Ike Pareda, okay? Let's take a short break, and I'll come back, and I'll start unpacking this a little bit.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon is back with all your mezcla favorites, like oxtail kadu, Kahlua pig and cabbage, and Chef Peter's style black stew frittata. Mezcla is ready to welcome back everyone with great service in a safe and friendly environment. Come on down and visit Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon, located on the first floor lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Open for lunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and for dinner from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Call 969-2652 for reservations. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Now, okay, here we are again. So Vince Pareda chimes in here and makes a really good point. Vince says, Bob, well, the assault charge was dismissed. Didn't he plead to harassment? And that's exactly right. But here's what the article says. According to the plea agreement, the assault charge was dismissed and Pareda was allowed to remain director, et cetera, et cetera. What does that lead you to believe? You know, not that the assault was dismissed and he pled guilty to it, it's just that the whole thing was dismissed and then somehow these strange conditions come out. So good call, Vince. Yeah, the plea agreement was harassment, or excuse me, the assault was dismissed and he pled to harassment. So, and then we have our lieutenant governor come along here and say, here's what he could have said, all right? Let me back up a little farther still. This is what I gathered from reading the news accounts of what happened last July. Pareda, as I recall, told a customs officer to do something, and either she didn't do it or didn't do it to his satisfaction, so he touched her on the shoulder. And she made a complaint that she was assaulted. Well, if you were to take a purist view of the law of assault, which used to be called the law of battery, the definition of a battery is an unprivileged touching. That is battery, right? And there used to be a distinction between assault and battery, but in modern times, we just put it all together into a single word called assault. So if I walked up, if you said something like, Bob, you're full of prunes, and I walked up to you and said, you better not say that, and touched you on the shoulder, that's a battery. Technically, that's a battery. Any unprivileged touching. That's why when you go to the doctor to have a hangnail worked on, they make you sign 17 different papers, because without your consent, whatever they're doing to you is that unprivileged touching. It's an assault. So whether this thing really got out of control, whether it was blown up beyond all proportion, whether it was a believe the woman writ large, was it more of the Me Too movement, which was at its height last July? I don't know, but one could gather that from the news articles that came out. So Pareda, the chief of customs wrote it down to, let's see, April, about, 9 months? And then he plea bargained and pled guilty to harassment. Now, if the governor wanted to keep him on board, this is what the governor could have said. Vince Ike Pareda has been a very good director of customs. He's been a very valuable member of my cabinet. And by the way, it's Pareto. That's confusing. Pareda and Pareto, not the same thing.
Not the same.
Ike Pareto has been a valuable member of my cabinet. He's a very, very good director at customs. He was charged with in an incident. He's gone before the court. He has pled guilty. There are some conditions to his plea. I've talked with him. I'm positive that he has learned his lesson and will no longer engage in anything that resembles risky conduct that might have put him in this same place again. Looking at it on balance, I've decided that for the good of my administration and for the good of the people, I'm going to keep Ike Pareto on the job. Now, she'd have taken a lot of heat over that, for sure, because there would have been some people out here in the peanut gallery that would have said, I don't care if they got him for overtime parking. It's corruption. You should have fired him, Governor. But if she wanted to keep him on board, that would have been the way to do it. The way the lieutenant governor did it, horrible, absolutely horrible. Because what he's saying is, yeah, we're going to keep him on the job because he took a bum rap. That's why we're going to keep him on the job, not because of any other reason. But he said, and he started out by saying, I'll say this, that I have been, the story says, I've been purview to information. That's just a dumb.
That's even worse.
Dumb choice of words. What the sentence is trying to say is, I'll say this, I've been privy to information. In other words, I know a lot about this case. That's what he's trying to say. I've heard from the investigators. The initial arrest was not based on an extensive investigation. You see? He's got inside information. He's talked to the investigators. The initial arrest was not based on an investigation, on an extensive. So the investigation was wrong. The investigators gave him inside information, which he is privy to. And then he goes on to say that let's break for the halftime show, and I'll come back to the Superior Court then.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Unrest near Minneapolis. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. Police confronting protesters outside Minneapolis in the area of Brooklyn Center Sunday night after a fatal shooting by police earlier in the day. This as the trial of a former Minneapolis police officer accused of killing George Floyd is set to resume on Monday. Fox's Mike Tobin is there watching the standoff.
We have the row of police officers in their riot gear. There have been hundreds and hundreds of protesters out here, but their numbers have decreased dramatically because the police deployed a bunch of smoke here, and that ran all the demonstrators off. They go back behind buildings, they go into a nearby parking lot, and then they just backfill. And they come back, the language has started, the taunting of the police. Now, all of this began with a traffic stop. A 20-year-old individual named Dante Wright was pulled over. According to a police release, they determined that he had an outstanding warrant.
Meanwhile, a Virginia town has announced that one of two police officers accused of pepper spraying and pointing their guns at a black Army officer during a traffic stop in December has since been fired. U.S. Army Second Lieutenant Karan Nazario filed a lawsuit earlier this month against the two Windsor officers. The announcement of the firing Sunday night comes hours after the governor called for an independent investigation into the incident. Plus, two Alabama state senators are proposing a tax to help fund Black history in the state.
Part of the statewide property tax goes to fund pensions for Confederate soldiers and their widows. It's the only tax directly tied to the Confederacy, and 1% goes to preserve and operate the state's Confederate Memorial Park in Mountain Creek. But Republican State Senator Clyde Chambliss and Democratic State Senator Bobby Singleton say they want to require Alabama to spend the equal amount of money on Black history sites. It's estimated the income generated could be around $500,000 for each purpose. Chambliss tells a local newspaper it's important for the state to remember the good and bad.
Fox's Rob Dawson. America is listening to Fox News.
Sunday brunch at Mezcla Bistro in Hagåtña is back.
Come and enjoy Mezcla's true taste of Guam.
At only $28.95, enjoy your Sunday with your friends and family with their free-flowing house mimosa or house draft beer. Open for 2 seatings at 10:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m.
Let Mezcla serve up your favorite local foods. Call them at 479-2652
or 479-2653 to book a reservation. Limited seating available.
Mezcla reminds everyone to be safe and stay sanitized. Sunday brunch at Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Is China ultimately responsible for the spread of COVID-19 across the world? Well, the U.S.'s top diplomat says there were definite failures.
Secretary of State Tony Blinken on NBC's Meet the Press said while the World Health Organization's report on the origin of COVID was inconclusive, China failed to take several steps at the outset.
In real time, give access to international experts. In real time, to share information. In real time, to provide real transparency.
For those reasons, he says the virus spread faster with perhaps more deadly results. Blinken says this shows that a better global health security system is needed to get ahead of the next pandemic. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
And Tokyo adopted tougher measures against the coronavirus as it struggles to curb the rapid spread of a more contagious variant ahead of the Olympics in a country where less than 1% of people have been vaccinated. Japan expanded its vaccination drive Monday to older residents, with the first shots being given in about 120 selected places around the country. The tougher COVID-19 rules allowed Tokyo's governor to mandate shorter opening hours for bars and restaurants, punish violators, and compensate those who comply. Officials urged residents to be cautious while vaccinations are in an early stage. Plus, Canada is making some changes to its COVID vaccine distribution campaign. Fox's Ted Lindner explains.
Canada says they're now going to be targeting frontline workers and moving away from what has been to this point an age-based rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. The country is currently dealing with a third wave of the pandemic, and Canada's approach thus far has left many essential workers like daycare providers, bus drivers, and meat packers unvaccinated. Provinces are now trying to adjust their strategy to tackle the surge driven by the new variants. The situation is most serious in Ontario, Canada's most populous province, where officials say the province is close to its worst-case scenario projections. Ted Lindner, Fox News.
I'm Mary Corsetti, and this is Fox News.
The vaccine is officially here, and we aren't just talking about the COVID vaccine, but a financial vaccine at Bank Pacific. We may not be doctors, but we can help you with your financial health. Whether to take advantage of today's crazy low rates, or just a local bank that has your back. At Bank Pacific, we want to help make 2021 your best year yet. Because for 66 years, where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community, yet national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Chili's is bringing you a full meal offer with 3 for me for just $15. You get a beverage, a starter, and an entree. First, choose from a refreshing Coca-Cola or iced tea, pick a starter, then select your choice of a mouth-watering entree, like Cajun pasta with grilled chicken, ranchero chicken tacos, or the savory Santa Fe burger. Dine in today or visit chilisguam.com for delivery and to-go options. Chili's, 3 for me for just $15. Available for a limited time. Chili's, savor the moment.
Off a day. This is Rocky Martinez, professional heavyweight MMA fighter. Nothing gets in my way when I go pro at Subway. Pack a punch with double the protein on any foot-long sub for just $2 more. For a limited time only. Subway. Eat fresh.
Another great halftime show that we've all come to know and love so well. Really great climax there with that barrage of cannon fire. Now we're in the second half of Tall Tales, and I'm going to go back to the Lieutenant Governor and what I think is the shameful way that he dealt with the Ike Pareto matter. If they wanted to keep Ike Pareto on board, then they could have done it in the manner that I suggested before the break. They could have said, yeah, he screwed up. He pled guilty. He owned up to his mistake. We're going to give him another chance. But instead, the lieutenant governor went out and attacked the entire judicial proceeding based on the fact that he thinks he has superior knowledge. But I can tell you, coming from the court, the way the systems works doesn't always allow for what I think is adequate justice, meaning that people get forced to plea to lesser offenses so they don't get stuck in the court system for years. And he also said, I'll say this, that I have been privy to information. I've heard from the investigators. He's had inside information. The initial arrest was not based on extensive investigation, bad investigation. And I remain very confident and supportive of his leadership. I regret this conflict with an employee. So, in other words, the lieutenant governor is saying the fact that there was a judicial resolution of this case involving the director of customs should not mean a whole lot to you unless you get the inside dope from the lieutenant governor who tell you that Ike Pareto had to take a bum rap. Bad investigation, the way things work, justice isn't always done. This comes from a guy who's been on the inside at the court. So what you just did, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, I suppose you think you were sticking up for Ike Pareto. But what you're doing is you're just crapping all over the judicial system. That's the net effect of what you're saying. What you're saying is that the fact that a defendant, an arrestee, went through the judicial system and pled guilty doesn't mean that he didn't do anything wrong. And in order to know how that works, you have to have been at the Superior Court like you and know how things work. This is an extremely disappointing display of public awareness, self-awareness by a public official that I've seen in a long, long time. Congratulations, Lieutenant Governor. Nice job. No! Okay, let's move on to the next item on the card here, which is... Oh, wait a second here. Okay, yeah, I had my papers backwards here. Sorry. Yeah. Next item on the card today is not going to be a really nice day for the Lieutenant Governor. The next item on the card is Tall Tales versus the Lieutenant Governor. Tall Tales, the anthropomorphized version of Tall Tales, is right here. That's me, yeah. And I have a letter that I wrote to the Lieutenant Governor. No later than close of business, April 16, you are required to email to me all public records dealing with the federal agency and land that the former NIS is referenced in the PNC article by Julianne Hernandez of April 9, which is pasted in and highlighted for your easy reference. So he's got until Friday to come up with some public records. Now here's the article. This is Julie. I don't know how they do this stuff. Lieutenant Governor gets his second vaccine shot, supports return of excess federal lands. Those topics are really related, aren't they? If he hadn't got his second vaccine shot, those people should never get their excess land, right? Anyhow, this is how the story goes. Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio got his second vaccination, etc. At the UOG Vaccination Friday, Lieutenant Governor said that although he has always advocated in favor of compensation and return of land to the original landowners, the process is not that simple. I guess he had to wait till he stuck a needle in his arm before this popped out of his mouth. He goes on to say, when the federal government returns the property, what are the conditions? He went on to explain that the complicated process of returning land. Sometimes the return of lands has conditions. In order to get the land transferred back, we have to follow the conditions. For return, if they restrict us for use, we have to comply with that. We have to make sure that we don't get ourselves into any problems. Many years ago, land was returned up at the airport in NAS. It was returned to the original landowners, and then we find ourselves now where one federal agency is wanting us to understand why we have to buy back the land was transferred for certain reasons. That's the source of my FOIA. I want to know, and again, many years ago, land was returned up at the airport in NAS. It was returned to the original landowners, and then we find ourselves now where one federal agency is wanting us to understand why we have to buy back land that was transferred for certain reasons. No later than the close of business on April 16, you were required to email to me all public records dealing with the federal agency and land that former NAS is referenced in the PNC article. I want to know what's going on. Letter from a federal agency saying, when we gave you that land, there were conditions. You disobeyed the conditions. Get off the land.
He filed it in Talina's office.
Yeah, that's right. He'll probably send me a copy of the Organic Act. So a little bit of unpacking. Now, everybody wants to use the term, give the land back to the original owners. when what is actually intended is the pre-condemnation owners. Yeah, if a piece of real property had been in the Martinez family from 1898 down until 1964, and on January 1st, 1964, I bought that property, and on January 2nd, the U.S. government condemned that property, I would not be the original owner. I would have been the pre-condemnation owner. Yeah. But everybody says, give the land back to the original owners. So filling in some of the blanks here. Now, I know that in the era leading up to World War II, the United States government took huge tracts of land. Places like Fort Campbell, Kentucky, a huge tract of land, which is mostly in Tennessee, by the way, to set up an army base. Fort Hood, Texas. When Fort Hood was condemned, it wiped out 6 towns. It just went in and took it all over. So this happened on a very large scale. Now, I haven't done an extensive search, but I haven't found a single situation where the United States government took any real property from a citizen under the doctrine of eminent domain and ever gave that property back to the pre-condemnation owner. Ever. Ever. If it happened, it doesn't happen very often because I'm interested in this stuff, and I've never found such a situation.
There was an interesting situation up in New London, Connecticut.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember. I can't remember the name of the...
Kello,
yeah.
versus... But that wasn't really interesting. That got a lot of hype in the newspaper, but that had been the law of eminent domain since the 1930s.
Yeah, what made it interesting is that after that was taken, nothing was done with that
nothing
property.
was done to it, yeah.
In fact, it's like they purposely made a blighted neighborhood.
Yeah. So the way eminent domain works is the government, the national government says, we want to take this piece of real property here. We estimate the value of this real property at X amount of money. They'll deposit that amount of money in the court. If you're the owner of that piece of real property, you can withdraw that money. You can use it to hire a lawyer. The most of the fighting in condemnation cases is not, well, let me read the amendment here again. It's under the Fifth Amendment. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Now remember, our Bill of Rights sets forth negative rights. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the national government can take real property. It just says that if the real property is taken, just compensation has to be paid. So that's what the Constitution says. And that's what happened in Kello versus New London. So there's very little litigation on what constitutes, what is that magical phrase? Public use. Very little debate about what constitutes public use. The action in a condemnation case is the valuation of the real property. If you follow the Ladzone condemnation, you know exactly what I mean. So once the real property is taken, and the U.S. government, as far as I know, always takes real property in what's called fee simple absolute. We have a complicated system of nomenclature that we use to describe land tenure that we borrowed from the Brits who put it together over 1,000 years ago. But fee simple means you own the land by yourself. It may be encumbered with a mortgage or something like that, but you own the land. So the United States government always takes in fee simple, and that means there's no residual interest in the pre-condemnation owner. It's not a fee simple and a condition subsequent or some other elaborate form of conveyance. So the United States government is under no obligation to return the land to the pre-condemnation owner after the United States government is done using it. Now, the way the law works is this. When the United States government has land that it no longer needs, it's supposed to provide notice to other government agencies, and any other government agency that has use for that land can take claim to it, and there will be a transfer of land to that agency. That's how we got our fish and wildlife preserve up in the northern end of the island. That used to be a Navy base called Naval Facility. It was a submarine tracking base. And when the Navy didn't need it any longer, it went to the Fish and Wildlife Service to establish that reserve up there. That's how it's supposed to work. If no federal agency has a need for the land, then it's offered to state and local government. Same setup. But if it goes to a state or local government, then there's supposed to be, it's supposed to be used for a, quote, public use. And that's part of the conveyance. You know, the city of Elkhorn says, we want that old Air Force base because we want to turn it into a public park. Get the land, you got to turn it into a public park. You can't turn it into a whorehouse, in other words. Yeah, which nobody would want to do anyhow. So that's how it ordinarily works. So when it came to land here on Guam, when the military got really serious about turning over excess land to the government, it would have gone for a public use under the government, except, and this is what I remember happening at the time, the government of Guam's argument was the public use that we want to put it to is to put it into private hands. This will spur economic development. This will be a good public use. So I can go along with, the result. I'm not so sure how that fits in to the law of returning excess land. So the way we did it is we created something that's not quite as inefficient as the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, but they're in a head-to-head race. That's the Ancestral Lands Commission. So the Ancestral Lands Commission is supposed to determine who the pre-condemnation owners were and deed that property to them. This gets pretty complicated because let's say the real property was taken in 1950 and it was owned by a gentleman named Sus Macaca. And by the time Sus Macaca died, he had children and great-grandchildren. But, of course, he never thought to will that property to anybody because it wasn't his. So the Ancestral Lands Commission has to sort all this stuff out. It's not easy work. So that's how it's supposed to work. Now, there's an interesting footnote here, and that's this. That I mentioned that as far as I know, the United States government has never returned property that it condemned to the pre-condemnation owner under any circumstance. But on Guam, we paid for the land twice. I mean, not we, the national government paid for the land twice and then gave it back. When the property was first condemned, remember I talked about the estimated compensation, et cetera. So just compensation was paid when the land was condemned. Now, a lot of people say, well, yeah, but it wasn't really just because you could hire Josh Tenorio to explain that one, why what the court determined
was his years at the court.
Yeah, with all of his experience, knowing how the system works, having talked to the investigators and all, yeah. So that was the first time. In 1978, Mr. Wonpat, as our Washington rep, got another act through Congress that would recompensate the pre-condemnation owners without them having to come up with any proofs that the original award was insufficient. It was, I had clients in that, and when I talked with the federal attorney on the other side, I said, let's face it, this is a giveaway money statute. That's what this is for. And over $39 million was given away to pay for the land the second time. And then when this latest wave came along where the military gave land back to the government of Guam, some people that got paid for the land twice then got the land back. Yeah. As we say in New York City, such a deal. So when we get back to what Josh is saying here, in his own stumbling way, what he's saying is that one of the federal agencies involved is saying you need to buy that land back because you didn't live up to the terms of the conveyance to you. That's the way I read this. So I think he owes it to all of us to come up and explain what it is he's talking about. Did I think that he would do that on his own? Did I think he would be posting here on Facebook or calling Tall Tales and say, Bob, this is what that's all about? No. So I sent him a FOIA. And of course, knowing this government's attitude about transparency, I know this is not going to be the end of the story. This is going to be the beginning of the story. And that's why I'm bringing it to your attention now, because we need to know this. All right, that's so much for that one. Next, I've got the Vigilance Committee versus Carlotta Leon Guerrero, but I noticed I had two. Did somebody lose patience?
No, it was just a sidebar conversation. Wasn't really going to get on.
Okay. I've got another Joe. He has a question about battery of person of authority versus employees. Another Joe is usually one item on the card behind, right? All right, we'll entertain your question, another Joe. So you want to know about the law of battery when we're talking supervisor and supervisee? Is that it, another Joe?
Well, what happened was I called up before the halftime show. It's kind of late, like you said, so I had to wait. And so I was just curious. If someone, as you said, put their hand on the shoulder, but let's say it's not a okay, in this case, you're talking about the director, right? So he's like a supervisor. But if there is an employee of an establishment, but they're not the supervisor, and do the same thing, they put a hand on his shoulder while, communicating some sort of opinion or instruction, is that considered battery?
Well, it's within the realm of possibility, and that's why I suppose Josh has a point about the investigation. He just picked the wrong time to express it. So let's say that A and B work for the waterworks, and A and B are talking, and A says to B, the way you tightened that pipe yesterday wasn't a very good job. And B said, well, what was wrong with it? And A reaches out and just touches him and says, well, you've seen people do that, just reach out and tap somebody when you're talking. Some people do it all the time. Question, would that be battery? Well, the key is it has to be an unprivileged touching. Now, it could very well be that an investigator who knew the entire context of the conversation would say, no, that was not an unprivileged touching. It was within the standard course of manners and customs that those people employ as they deal with one another. So it isn't something like, if you touch me, you're going to jail. It's a lot more, it's more complicated than that. And that's why I mentioned that back in July when this came up, I thought it was a pretty slender reed upon which to hang a criminal case if all Pareto did was touch her on the shoulder. As I recall, he said he did it in order to get her attention. But nowadays, given the woke era that we live in, and if you're dealing with someone, I would ordinarily say of the opposite sex, but now I can't say that. I'd have to say of a different sex. It can be hazardous. Okay, another Joe?
So it depends on the context of the situation.
Absolutely.
That includes in the private sector. It also is the same. They handle it the same way with the private sector as well. Like say
the law is the same within or outside the government. Yeah.
And the context I was going to inquire about was like say a customer or versus an employee, say at McDonald's. An employee who is not a supervisor putting a hand on the customer's shoulder, instructions or comments.
I may have to call in an expert witness on that. When a drive-through Jack calls in at about 5 to 6, I'll ask him about it. Okay, another Joe.
Yeah.
I gotta go. I gotta go to the 7th inning stretch. Another Joe.
Oh. Okay. Thanks.
All right. 7th inning stretch, and then I got. How appropriate. I've got the Georgia peach in the green room right after the 7th inning stretch, sharpening his spikes, no doubt.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
So we moved the 7th inning stretch today from Wrigley Field in Chicago to Tiger Stadium in Detroit in honor of the fact that we have the Georgia Peach online here. And those of you who were watching the game right before the 7th inning saw that the second baseman for the Red Sox had to be carried off the field because when the Tigers hitter hit a scratch single, and the Georgia Peach, Ty Cobb, was on first base. He ran for second and slid in with his spikes flying high and cut the second baseman for the Red Sox so bad he had to be carried off the field. But, of course, the Georgia Peach was safe. Did you enjoy that play, Ron?
Hey, happy day, Senator. Happy day, Guam. Yeah, I do like Ty Cobb. He was quite cantankerous, though. Absolutely. Senator, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just going to mention a couple of things about land and other things. So if we look at Retidian, and if you go back to the history of Retidian, part of the give and take was that originally they wanted to put an early warning radar position up there. And the government opposed it, and so then it was turned into a wildlife station, basically, or a wildlife preserve area. And that was kind of the give and take for, they didn't want the federal government to put the radar there, and so the counter then became, well, we'll turn into a wildlife preserve. So I don't think we really kind of think out sometimes as thoroughly as we should these requests we make of the federal government. Another example is Tidzin. Keatson had all kinds of issues and concerns relative to environment. And in other locations in the U.S., the military, when they gave the lands to the local government, they cleaned it up and they made sure that the land was suitable for use and things like that. But the government of Guam didn't demand that. They wanted it back in an expedited sort of way. And so we ended up having property there, but it's got a lot of problems with it. And we didn't really kind of go through the steps that we might have considered to really have done it in the right sort of way. And so that's just kind of my 2 cents worth a little bit on those issues.
Well, if you step back and look at NAS, I don't think we could have done a worse job. We took prime real estate and turned much of it into a slum. Because the Navy, being as inconsiderate as it was, never surveyed the lots upon which the houses sat. So when you get a house, how do you borrow money on a house that's just sitting on that land, potentially with disputed title to start with, if you can't borrow money on it?
Right.
And you just drive through there on the airport access road. You know, what a waste of houses. You know, we're talking about housing for the homeless, and their houses just sitting there moldering. You drive past the old Fouled Anchor, which once upon a time was a really nice restaurant, and it's just a home for the homeless now.
Right. And, you know, it is quite unfortunate. And I think that in general, there were a lot of opportunities relative to that property, but also, if I recall, and I wasn't here at the time, I have just read about these things. The government, our government, was one of the few jurisdictions in the United States that wanted to put its head on the BRAC chopping block.
That's right.
So to speak. Our government was extremely eager to, get these processes moving forward, and they didn't really. One of the 3 pillars of our economy is the military, and there's ways to optimize civil-military relationship and get as much money as we can from, having a military presence here and doing it right, versus just these kinds of, add-on or limited thinking approaches sometimes that are taken that may have a short-term net perceived positive, but in the long term, they're very detrimental overall. And I just would hope that in the future we have a little bit more thought given into some of these major moves that are being proposed or made. But anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on it. A lot of the thinking that I see related to how our government approaches its civil-military relationship is very limited and short-sighted. There's no long-term partnership view expressed quite often, and that's unfortunate, because I think that if we look at these things in a more pragmatic way, we might get more benefit from them.
Well, of course, whenever there is something to be done concerning military land or military, there's this feeling amongst our local politicians that they must somehow mute the grievance politics that comes from the separatist part of the island, which oftentimes really doesn't do anybody any good, even them.
Right. And, the interesting thing is the anti-side that you're talking about have such limited and small numbers. I'm surprised that politicians often are as concerned as they are about them, because they don't really, in my view, genuinely represent the majority of Chamorro people or long-term residents or anyone else. It's just a very vocal contingent quite often, and it's just unfortunate, because when you actually get right down to it and look at real numbers, the real numbers are next to nothing.
I agree, Ron.
Very good. Very good show, sir.
Okay, thanks for calling in. And back those Tigers, Ron.
Yeah, final point. I can't stand Major League Baseball in Georgia. I hate to see corporations dabble in state and local politics like that, especially, when it's done in the way that Major League Baseball did it.
Absolutely.
They didn't do it with any discussion, any real meaningful review of what the law said or anything else.
When
By the way, Kemp was my classmate in high school, the governor of Georgia. I don't know him very well, but we graduated the same year. It's kind of interesting trivia.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the Major League Baseball struck out in Atlanta. Good talking to you, Ron. Okay, so let's see. I got a couple folks here in the green room getting ready for the home stretch. So I got another Joe. Didn't another Joe already ride on the Ferris wheel once?
He did.
Yeah. And then I got Drive-Through Jack. So I'm going to go with Drive-Through Jack. I don't know if I'm going to let another Joe on the Ferris wheel again or not. We'll have to see how it goes with Drive-Through Jack. Maybe you were going to answer the question that another Joe posed here recently, Jack.
What was the question there, Bob?
Well, we were talking about the law of assault and battery, and another. I gave a couple of examples, and then another Joe said, "Well, what if a customer goes into McDonald's, and while he's in there, the manager of McDonald's touches him? Would that be a battery?" And I said, "Well, I better defer on that one until the home stretch and give it to an expert, Drive-Through Jack."
Well, when you mentioned assault and battery, I'm just a lay person, so I'm thinking about table salt and a D-cell battery. So unless those two things are involved, probably the manager in McDonald's will be passing the salt there, so I guess it'll be assault. Anyways, I just called in.
Yeah.
Listen to Ron.
Yeah. You can get salt in McDonald's, you just can't get pepper.
Yeah, you can get soy sauce too at McDonald's.
Right.
But I was listening to Ron, and he said, he said that if they were only pragmatic about it in their approach between the local and the military, that's as pragmatic as you can get. Somebody wants something. Somebody says, "I can't give you this. I got to do all this. I got to clean this up. I got to get it to its proper." And the other person says, "No, I want it right now." Okay, then sign this paper. We don't have to do this cleanup and stuff like that. How pragmatic can you get? That's pragmatic at its very theory, its very definition, its very core of existence. So when Ron says they needed to be more pragmatic about it, maybe he was thinking about another word, but it sure wasn't pragmatism.
Let's see if we could work practical into that sentence.
There you go. So, what's the best way to...
And by the way, Drive-Through Jack, quibbling about words and word usages, that's really my job. But go on with what you're saying.
Well, there has been a lot of doublethink going around. So I guess it is your wheelhouse, because I think the best people at double-thinking are lawyers.
Absolutely.
It's not no slide on them or criticism. They're just good at it. They're good at double thinking. So I just I do remember the BRAC. I do remember the base closures and stuff like that. I was down there. It was at the current legislature that they had those 3-minute or 5-minute. I think it was 3 minute per speaker to come in there and speak before the BRAC commission about the land return. And the sad part about it is, like you said earlier in your program, some people are more equal than others. And that's what it comes down to here in land and Guam. If you really want to know the atrocities, the horror stories about land here in Guam, it has never been the military versus the local. There's always been a local crime. And I say this, if you just go into a probate hearing back then, even up to today, just step into one probate hearing where you got a family member fighting another family member because that family member knew English and had this brother sign over this and make his mark, so they got land all the way down there. I mean, it's atrocious. It's just horror stories that come out of probate hearings here in Guam. And I don't know why more focus hasn't been put on that when there's about argument about land here. It has the horror stories has never been the military versus the local people. It has always been a Chamorro on Chamorro crime, and it exists today in the land trust, and that's why I don't fret over what's going on there, because when you look at it, really Chamorros in the original state just don't have or hold. I'm not saying about the majority. I'm just saying those that hang on to this idea that the land for Guam belongs to the Chamorro. They have a different concept about property rights that is different from the West or Western or whatever you want to call it, Western first world attributes about what property rights are. It's just totally different. So I don't fret when they say they want independence, because I think in their minds, things haven't worked that well for them under the U.S. constitutional system. So I don't blame that for that. But at the same time, I don't throw them under the bus. I don't say that it's not possible for them. I say, hey, it's your right to believe what you want to believe. Same thing with this vaccine. Hey, go for it. But don't try to voluntold me that I have a choice. Because I was in the military. I know what voluntold means. And when it comes to vaccines, when it comes to these arguments about, land, who owns the land, I still think the Parrish family should get their land back up there at Hospital Point. But hey, I don't know what happened to that. But it's just, I really think that the worst crime about land has always been a Chamorro on Chamorro thing.
Okay, Jack. Well, we'll enshrine your ruling in the text of Tall Tales, but I got a break for
all right, Bob.
My trip to Churchill Downs. Good talking to you, Jack.
Listen to The Point. Any speaker, anytime. Check us out on your FM radio at 93.3, 104.3 HD3, thepoint.gu, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and tune in. And announcing radio.com. Download the app and hear The Point. Get the latest news, sports, entertainment, and more. On demand. Your phone is digital. Your life is digital. And we are too. 93.3, The Point.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon is back with all your mezcla favorites, like oxtail cadu, Kahlua pig and cabbage, and Chef Peter's style black stew frittata. Mezcla is ready to welcome back everyone with great service in a safe and friendly environment. Come on down and visit Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon, located on the first floor lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Open for lunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and for dinner from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Call 969-2652 for reservations. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
And here we are, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, for the home stretch for today's Tall Tales. And the next item on the card is the Vigilance Committee versus Carlotta Leon Guerrero, who is not just Carlotta Leon Guerrero. She is the acting SHPO. Now, there's a protocol list for the government of Guam. You've got a lieutenant governor, you've got a governor, you've got a speaker of the legislature, you've got a chief justice of the Supreme Court. Important folks, but none are as important as the State Historical Preservation Officer, also known as the SHPO. Yep. So we have an acting SHPO right now because the permanent SHPO is on duty with the Air Force Reserve or the Air Guard. So Carlotta Leon Guerrero, who is a special assistant at the governor's office, is the acting SHPO. And a controversy arose over a burial ceremony at Camp Blas that occurred back in November 4 of 2020. And this was, as the saying goes, kept on the down low, that nobody knew anything about it. And when it became a little bit public, then some of the environmental wackos and cultural wackos started making noise about it. And Carlotta came on and said, well, I really can't tell you about that because, there are a lot of things that we want to do here. You people are really too dumb to understand it until we're finished doing what we want to do. And she kind of got away with it. And then it popped up again, and it got to the point where the speaker called an oversight hearing on this particular matter, and the Vigilance Committee did a couple of Sunshine Law requests. And after the Vigilance Committee got involved, all of a sudden there seemed to be a change of heart. So I have for immediate release from yesterday, from Friday, April 9. So, one of the little tricks here, if you are ever the spokesman for a government agency, if you have something that you're not really happy about, release it at 4:30 on Friday afternoon. Because by the time we get to Monday, people will have forgotten about it. The news turkeys will have all gone home or forgotten about it or whatever. If you want the story to have legs, release it on Monday. And if you do it right, you could perhaps control the news cycle for the whole week. So this came out on Friday. And I'm going to start out in the middle because I think this is the real key language here. Well, I have been advised by counsel. The governor has directed me to publish this information in the public interest, and I will respectfully comply. Now, I'll go back and fill that in. But this is what the acting SHPO is saying. She was saying that she acted on the advice of counsel when she was not turning this information loose. And, of course, that comes in so handy for folks. Counsel said, I can't release this, or the lawyer, I'm going to check with our lawyer, and the lawyer said that we can't release this. It's a personnel matter, and on and on and on. So here's what Carlotta said. Well, I have been advised by counsel, meaning don't blame me. I was just doing what the lawyer said. But now the governor has come along. So she's kind of dissing the governor here a little bit. I was advised by counsel not to release that information. But then the governor comes along and has directed me to publish this information in the public interest, suggesting to me that not publishing it was not in the public interest, right? Yeah, that would have been the position I would have taken. And then she says, I will respectfully comply. Instead of just going forward and doing this without saying hello, goodbye, or whatever, she has to tell us that I was only following orders from the lawyer because I couldn't give it to you. And now the big boss come along. So when she had to let us know that was the reason she couldn't do it. But now the governor has told her she's got to do it. And she's going to respectfully comply instead of just doing it without sticking the sentence in here. There's a little bit of, I am and that's why I said, we've got all these other dudes. We got the lieutenant governor and the speaker, but their power and authority and prerogatives all pale in the face of the SHPO. I wonder if the shippo ever visited the 19th floor. So that's where that sentence is coming from, just to let you know how important Carlotta is, and that unless the governor directs her to do something, she ain't going to do it. And when she does it, she's going to do it in such a manner as to say, Governor, this is on you, not on me. So here's, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. This is a press release from the governor's office. On November 4, a ceremony was held at the site of Camp Bloss. During this ceremony, remnants of a pottery bowl was returned to its skeletal remain. A pottery bowl was returned to its skeletal remains.
The owner.
Yeah, the original. They gave the pottery bowl back to the original owner, yeah. And then covered back up by dirt. Not with dirt, but by dirt. Covered back up by dirt. So they had remnants of a pottery bowl. They found the skeletal remains. They put the pottery bowl in there, and they covered it back up by dirt. The event was attended by the governor, Rear Admiral Maloney, Colonel McGrath, acting Shippo, Carlotta Leon Guerrero. Protocol listing is wrong there. She shouldn't be third. She should be first. State archaeologist Mark Joseph, State archaeologist John Mark Joseph? I guess that's his name. Sounds like somebody giving a command. Hey, John, Mark Joseph. Anyhow, the Shippo historic preservationist, Joe Garrido. The Shippo historic preservationist, Joe Garrido. Vera Topaznia from the Community Defense Liaison Office. Talk about a gathering of eagles, huh? Later that day, as acting Shippo, I was sent a preliminary report, 5 paragraphs in length, from Ronnie Rogers, the archaeologist for the Marine base. The preliminary report, which I have so far declined to release in its entirety, is included in this news release. She declined to release the whole thing. But now she's putting it out. I would note, with the release of this 5-paragraph preliminary report, that it is not a final document, and assessments of findings are still underway. Well, I have been advised by counsel. Going back to the preliminary report, which I have so far declined to release in its entirety, read together with while I have been advised by counsel. Okay, I'm going to have to come back to this tomorrow. Another Joe, we'll pick you up tomorrow on that same question if you want to call right after Jimmy Acotney.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Civil unrest after a man is shot by police. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. Police confronted protesters outside Minneapolis in the city of Brooklyn Center Sunday night after a fatal officer-involved shooting, and the incident happened with the trial of Derek Chauvin continuing in bordering Minneapolis on Monday.
Demonstrators have gathered to protest the fatal shooting of a black man by an officer during a traffic stop Sunday afternoon. The driver had been pulled over for a violation. That's when police learned there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest. Police say the suspect then got back in his car and tried to get away. That's when he was shot by an officer. He hit another vehicle while driving off and eventually died at the scene. Since the killing, a crowd gathering and police have used tear gas and flashbangs on the crowd.
Fox's Jackie Ibanez reporting. Brooklyn Center Mayor Mike Elliott has imposed a citywide curfew until 6 a.m. Plus, congressional Democrats and Republicans are squaring off over the newest legislative fight, President Biden's roughly $2 trillion infrastructure plan.
The president is looking to increase the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, but then you have moderate senators, Democrats like Joe Manchin, who said, listen, let's just meet in the middle, call it a day at 25%. The White House certainly willing to negotiate, according to a White House spokesperson. But what I can say is the president is set, though, to meet with members of Congress from both sides of the aisle at the White House to specifically speak about what the White House is calling an infrastructure package, but what Republicans are calling a massive spending bill.
That's Fox's David Spunt, and the chairman of the Federal Reserve says the U.S. economy is poised for an extended period of strong growth and hiring despite the pandemic. Chair Jerome Powell also tells CBS's 60 Minutes that he doesn't expect this year to raise the Fed's benchmark interest rate, currently pegged at nearly zero. Powell also downplays the risk of higher inflation stemming from sharp increases in government spending and expanding budget deficits. America is listening to Fox News.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. Stay on top of the latest news and information from Fox News. Listen and download the Fox News Hourly Update on your time. The trending stories you need anytime you want it. Listen and download now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
What are the most important issues facing Americans today? Every Monday, join me, Brett Baer, chief political anchor and executive editor of Special Report, and my rotating all-star panel of experts as we discuss the policies, practices, and solutions to the biggest and most important issues of the day. You can hear new episodes every Monday. Subscribe now at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts.
The Fox News Rundown is a weekday morning podcast that dives deep into the major and controversial stories of the day. Hosted by the anchors of Fox News Radio. Subscribe now to hear a perspective of news you won't find anywhere else. Listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.